The ownership had decided they were ready to move on. I paid $44 million for the franchise. The highest price ever paid for a team at that time was $32.5. The media afterwards said to me, "Jerry, why would you do that?" And I said, "Well, I believe in this city. I believe in this market. That's number one. Number two, I believe in the NBA, in the future of the NBA. And number three, I believe in myself." That was 1987. In 2004, when I sold the team, it was for over $400 million. I don't look back on that and say, gee, if you had kept the team for another 20 years, look where you would have had the value at. That's not important to me. You make decisions and you move on.
And you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, can you make the pass? Yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 127. Thanks for joining me. Today, I'm excited to welcome the Godfather of Arizona sports, Jerry Colangelo. Jerry's contributions to professional sports are immeasurable. In this conversation, we focus primarily on his incredible basketball journey. Jerry discusses his high school, college, and semi-pro playing career before detailing how he became involved with the birth of Chicago's NBA franchise in 1966. He recalls how the team's nickname, Bulls, came to be and what it was like to be a day one employee. We cover his move to Arizona, where he was GM of another expansion franchise, the Phoenix Suns. Jerry talks about the famed coin flip to obtain the services of Lou Alcindor, later Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and how the Suns worked their way into an NBA Finals appearance in 1976 versus the mighty Boston Celtics. Jerry describes how he built the mid to late 80s Suns into title contenders and the big trade that brought Sir Charles Barkley from Philadelphia to the Valley of the Sun. We briefly cover Jerry's vital role in rebuilding Team USA, but for more context, I've included a link in the show notes to an in-depth podcast episode where Jerry discusses how he turned that program around. A huge thanks to great friend of the show, Fat Lever, for the assist in connecting with Jerry, and also thanks to Jennifer Gray, Vice President of JDM Partners, Jerry's company, for helping arrange a suitable time to chat with Jerry. Towards the end of the episode, I'll share another great podcast review. If you can spare a moment, please add your review via Apple Podcasts. See the reviews link on my website. It would be most appreciated. Show notes for this episode and access to a huge archive of past episodes are available at inallairness.com. Now, onto the show. My guest today is inextricably linked to the history of basketball. He starred at Bloom Township High School in Chicago Heights and was a standout collegiately at Illinois before landing a job with the expansion Chicago Bulls in 1966. 2 years later, aged just 28, he became the youngest general manager in professional sports when he moved his family to Phoenix to run the expansion Suns. He's a four-time NBA Executive of the Year and was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2004. Mr. Jerry Colangelo, thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure to be with you. I hope things are well with you.
Things are going well here in Australia, thank you. May I please call you Jerry?
Absolutely.
Thank you, that's great. Researching for our chat today, I read that as a high school senior, your Bloom Township Trojans won a third straight South Suburban League title, and along with your teammates Bob Bell and Homer Thurman, you were named first team All-Star by the Chicago Tribune. Your Trojans won the sectional title of the state tournament in your senior season, and twice in your high school career, from what I've read, your team made it to the Sweet 16 of the state tournament. When you reflect on those high school days, what stands out most to you, Jerry?
Well, the opportunity to play a game that I love as much as I did, and to have some great teammates. And I appreciate the coaching I had under Coach Burt Moore, who had a lot of confidence in me and let me go. In other words, he let me play to my strengths. And I appreciated that because it served as a springboard to be able to perform reasonably well on a collegiate level.
In terms of your sporting prowess, it extends beyond just the basketball court. I wasn't aware of how great a baseballer you were in your early years as well. I believe you're a left-handed pitcher. I've read that later in 1957, you helped lead Chicago Heights to a Cook County American Legion junior baseball title. At what point did you have to make the decision to focus on either baseball or basketball?
Well, I was originally more involved in baseball than basketball, but basketball came on very strong. As a left-handed pitcher, I did have offers to sign as a young player. One of my teammates was a guy named Jim Boughton, who went on to pitch for the Yankees, wrote a pretty tough book at the time called Ball 4, which was kind of an expose of what happens in a locker room. And that didn't help his career, if you will. We won the Teener League World Series when I was 14. We got to the American Legion Nationals when I was 17. I broke my hand and my arm was kind of gone by overpitching. And I was offered a nice bonus by one of the MLB teams, but I had 6 teams wanting to sign me. But basketball had already become a big part of my life, and I made a decision. If I could get enough cash in the way of a bonus, I would have foregone basketball. I know that's hard to believe today, looking back at my whole life being around basketball, but I didn't get that offer, so it wasn't meant to be. And I'm glad it turned out the way it did.
That's a great sliding doors moment, if ever there was one. I was fascinated to learn how close you were to becoming teammates in college with the legendary Wilt Chamberlain. When you were a high school senior, Wilt was a sophomore at Kansas. And from what I understand, a conversation with Wilt helped make you return back to Illinois to play with the Fighting Illini after one semester at Kansas.
I actually had 66 college basketball offers, and I limited my interest to just a handful of schools: Notre Dame, Michigan, Illinois, my home state school, and Kansas, because Wilt was there. Back in those days, freshmen were not eligible, so I would have had 1 year with Wilt. His senior year would have been my sophomore year. And I knew I could start. They really needed outside shooting. That was one of my strengths. That's why they wanted me badly. So I go there and I locker next to Wilt and get to know him pretty well. And one night he shares with me that he's not coming back. He's going to sign with the Globetrotters for $75,000. And I said, "You can't do that. I came all the way out here." And he says, "Yeah, well, I'm out of here and you are too." Something like that. So I went in, told the coach I wanted to transfer, and he wasn't happy about that. In fact, he gave me a little bit of incentive. He said to me, "You're a quitter. You're never going to amount to anything in terms of your future." And I just looked at him and I said, "Coach, I hope I can prove you wrong." And I turned around and walked out. And that's the last time I saw him. So I went to Illinois. That was meant to be. A lot of great things happened. I met a young lady who has been my wife now for 61 years. I played as a sophomore, junior, and senior in terms of basketball. Baseball, I pitched 2 years, but I was through. I couldn't throw hard anymore. So 2 years of college baseball. I was captain, all Big Ten honors at the university. That was fine. But it also gave me a lot of exposure in my home state, which led to, because of that exposure, a man who had a dream to bring pro basketball to Chicago, wanting me to be part of his startup team. Yeah, that was in 1966. I got out of school in 62. And in 65, I met Mr. Klein, and we were awarded the franchise in the spring of 66. And lo and behold, that was the birth of the Chicago Bulls.
Remarkable. And you certainly did show that coach of yours at Kansas what you could go on to become. An incredible turnaround for sure. Just to give our listeners some context, you were an honourable mention All Big Ten selection as a junior and senior with the Fighting Illini, and you were the team captain as a senior, played all 23 games in 1962, and the team went 15-8. You averaged close to 13 points and more than 4 rebounds a game. I was curious, actually, in the Chicago Tribune, they described your game for a great outside shooter, and you're about 6'2" or thereabouts.
6'3".
At that time, if there had been a 3-point line, were you beyond that sort of range?
I really did have pretty good range. I did a lot of crazy things as a young kid. I would eat a lot of carrots because supposedly carrots would help my shooting. I would shoot at night because my attitude was if I could shoot with the moonlight, I could sure shoot a lot better when the lights were on in the gym. Did a lot of shoveling of ice and snow to be able to shoot the ball every day. And those are great memories and great things to look back upon because nothing comes easy in life. You have to earn it. You have to work at it. Fortunately, I fell in love with sports and had some ability and tried to maximize as much of it as I could.
That you certainly did. Following college, you played some semi-professional basketball in what was called the North American Basketball League. Now, I knew very little of this league before researching for our chat today. You played with the Chicago Bombers, then you were traded to the Holland Carvers, who are based in Michigan. How would you describe that NABL experience?
It was basically a bunch of guys who could play, who were a hair below the NBA level of play. Bear in mind that at that time, there were only 9 teams in the NBA. 9 teams. Chicago turned out to be the 10th team when it was expanded in 1966. So it was an outlet for guys like me who still wanted to play. We got paid a few bucks. I think it was $50 a game when there was cash. There wasn't always cash to pay us, but I loved it. The fact that I made so many friends, I had so many associates, teammates. I kind of grew up in the game. The transition going up the ladder has always been pretty easy for me, even being traded. It was a good experience. They didn't want you anymore, but there was somebody who did. I'll tell you a funny story. On the evening before the announcement that Chicago was being awarded the franchise, I'll take you back to the day before. Klein was in New York awaiting the decision by the NBA owners. He called me. I was in Chicago at the offices in a snowstorm. He said, "We got it. We're in." We had kept everything we were doing in Chicago under wraps. Nobody knew that we were buying for a franchise. So I sent a telegram out to all the media as soon as I got the call from Klein, and it said, "An important sports announcement of both local and national interest will be made tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at the Water Tower Inn, signed the Chicago Bulls." We had already picked a name. The name came from a dinner that Klein and I had 2 weeks earlier. We couldn't play at the Chicago Stadium. The Wirtz family that owned the hockey team, the Blackhawks, felt that basketball would not make it in the city. We had to go to the amphitheater, which was the old place where we used to slaughter cows and pigs and everything else. It didn't smell very good, but they had a building, 10,000 seats, and we played our first season in that old building. Over dinner that night in Chicago, he said, "Look, we're going to know whether we have a team in 2 weeks. We don't have a name." And I said, "Well, we can't play at the stadium. I think Chicago needs a real tough-looking logo and name. We're going to be at the amphitheater, the old slaughterhouse." He said, "Well, what are you saying?" I said, "What about Bulls?" He said, "That's it." That was how the name of the team came about, over dinner and using the logic I just gave you. So back to the story of sending out the telegram, and it signed the Chicago Bulls. I took the news releases that my secretary had prepared, jumped in the car, drove around the lake in snowstorm to Michigan to play. You said I was traded to Holland. Well, Holland was playing Chicago. This turned out to be my last game competitively that I played it. In an overtime, we won. I did hit the game winner. I did have 37 points. And after the game, my teammates, everybody wanted to celebrate. I broke the news to them about what was going to happen the next morning. I got home in a snowstorm, no sleep, got to the hotel, went to the press conference, passed out the news releases, and that was the birth of the Chicago Bulls.
That's absolutely remarkable. And what an incredible 36 hours for yourself to do all that and then follow through the following day with that massive news. Some of the newspapers at the time listed your position with the Bulls as director of merchandising, and others suggest that it was a combination of sales promotion director and head scout. Regardless of what the title was, how exciting was it for you to be working in your home city with the newly established franchise, the Chicago Bulls?
Well, it was fantastic. It was interesting. Even in our first year, Seattle and San Diego were added as expansion teams, and the Seattle group wanted me in Seattle. And I said, no, I'm a Chicago guy. I'm happy where I am. And it was a mom and pop league. It was a mom and pop operation. We only had like 8 people in the front office in Chicago, and you did whatever needed to be done. I did all the scouting. I actually served in many ways as a GM because my boss was listed as president and GM, but he didn't do any of those day-to-day activities at all. So I did all the marketing. I did all the scouting. I did anything I needed to do, including sweeping the floor. So you learn from the ground up.
Clearly, you were a linchpin of the organization from basically day one. So it's great to hear these stories. I really appreciate you sharing them with us. I actually also read somewhere in the Chicago Tribune that on occasion you scrimmaged with the Bulls players if they were short on guards. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's true. And had a lot of fun doing it. There wasn't much difference between many of the players, including myself, with some of the guards. So during that first summer, in preparation for our first season in Chicago, Johnny Kerr was our head coach. We would work out players as they came in at the old Boston YMCA. So Johnny and I would play 2-on-2 against rookies, some of the vets that came in. Johnny and I were undefeated all summer. We didn't lose any games. We weren't optimistic about what might happen during the regular season. Turned out we won 33 games. We made the playoffs, winning only 33. But it was a wonderful, great experience. It was so exciting to be in the pros, to be involved the way I was and the way we all were starting a franchise. And by the way, looking at the cap on your head with the Bull, after we had that dinner and I said to Klein, and he agreed, he said, it's the Bulls. That's the name. And I said, I'm going to have my friend who's in the advertising business do a logo for us. And what I have in mind is kind of a mean-looking bull that truly represents the city of Chicago in the colors, black, red, etc. That's what he did over the next few days. That's the only logo in the NBA history that's never changed. The fellow I'm referring to is a fellow named Jack Mathis. He had an advertising agency, Jack A. Mathis Company. In fact, prior to the Bombers, I played on the Jamico Saints. It was an AAU team, and a number of players who ended up playing in the ABA and in the NBA started that way. That was a fun time for me also. This all happened between 62 and 66 during those years before the Bulls were born.
In 1968, at age just 28, you left Illinois and moved your family to Phoenix, Arizona. How did the opportunity to be the youngest general manager in professional sports history at that time come about?
Well, I mentioned Seattle a little bit ago that they were interested in me. A fellow named Sam Schulman was to be the owner of the Seattle team, and he became friends with a guy named Block in Los Angeles who turned out to be one of the principals of the new Phoenix team. Schulman recommended me to Block. He said, this is a guy you need. And that's how that came about in terms of the offer from Phoenix. Milwaukee had offered me the GM job also. And I had a choice, stay in Chicago where my boss wanted me to stay, Phoenix or Milwaukee. When I came to Phoenix for a visit, I had not been to Phoenix previously because of scouting. I traveled quite a bit, extensively, but never Phoenix. I saw an incredible place. It was almost as though here's a new city. It's just starting to grow. I would use the following way to explain it. I saw a blank canvas. I just loved the idea of picking up the family, making that move. We left 2 weeks after that visit to Phoenix with 3 kids, 2, 4, and 6, 9 suitcases with whatever we had, left everything else behind, $300 in my pocket, and we moved to Phoenix and never looked back.
You hired Johnny Red Kerr away from the Bulls to become Phoenix's first head coach. And in that inaugural season, the Suns went 16 and 66. What do you remember most about that first year on the court as the Suns made their way into the NBA?
Well, we had a strategy. When we went through the expansion draft, we were taking young players, truly believing in our heart of hearts that we were going to win the flip of the coin for Lou Alcindor, who later became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Milwaukee's strategy was take grizzly old veterans, and they did. Leonard Chappell, people like that. And they won 20-some games. We won 16, but everything was geared toward, we're going to win the flip. Well, we didn't win the flip. We lost the flip of the coin. And he went to Milwaukee, changing his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I had to start over. I made a comment to the media. I says, well, we're going to have to do it the hard way. And before the next season began, I acquired Connie Hawkins from the ABA, traded for Paul Silas, a power forward from Atlanta, drafted Neil Walk, a center from Florida, and a few other smaller pieces. We went from 16 wins to 39 wins in 1 year. It was the biggest turnaround at that time in the history of the NBA. At midseason, I wasn't happy with progress, and I actually relieved my good friend Johnny Kerr of his duties, and I replaced him with myself. I just felt I had the desire and the ability, I thought, to get the job done. We did bring it together. We had a good run. We made the playoffs. Very exciting time. We established ourselves in Phoenix, and we ran up against the LA Lakers with 3 Hall of Famers to beat. My old friend, Will Chamberlain, Elgin Baylor, and Jerry West. And we had them down 3-1. And they came back to beat us in 7. But we truly did establish our franchise in Phoenix in that second year, even though we lost the flip of the coin. And about 6 years later, we got to the finals. Well, we played Boston in 76.
A fantastic series. Obviously, it didn't end the way you'd like to, but it was an incredible 6 games. The iconic Game 5, triple overtime. Just going back for a moment to that coin toss, there's some amazing footage of you and Red Kerr listening via the phone to then Commissioner at the time, Walter Kennedy, as he announced the result of that coin flip. Your reactions speak volumes. You called heads, and the result ended up being tails.
Well, I wanted the fans to be involved in the decision-making process. There was a big vote that took place through the newspapers, and 51.2% said, call heads if you get the opportunity. And we called the commissioner. He said, look, if Milwaukee is okay with that, that's fine with me. Milwaukee said, sure. So they used the Kennedy $50, and Kennedy himself was in New York with his staff. Milwaukee was in Milwaukee, and we were in Phoenix. There was no big TV deal here. Here's really what happened. Kennedy took the coin, he flipped it in the air, and it came up heads, and he flipped it over and called tails. Now, just this little move from here to here changed history, for sure. I was devastated. The scene that you saw at the desk when he made the call, it was really tough. It was hard. But hours later, your sleeves are rolled up and you're going back to work. We recovered quickly, I thought, and so did everyone else in basketball. I look at it as I had 40 great years with the Suns.
In June of 1969, you signed the would-be Hall of Famer Connie Hawkins, who you mentioned a little while ago. You signed him as a free agent. He had the previous 2 seasons in the ABA with the Pittsburgh Pipers, and then they became the Minnesota Pipers. In his 4 full seasons with Phoenix, Connie was an all-star every year, and he averaged better than 20 points, 9 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. You actually had Connie as one of the 4 people who were there on the night you were inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2004. Obviously, your links go back many decades. What was it like to witness Connie Hawkins in full flight, pardon the pun?
He made first-team All-NBA that first year with us, so he had an outstanding year. Connie, unfortunately, didn't take care of himself physically as a young player. He was so-called barred from playing in the NBA. He kind of was around the ABA, ABL. By the time he got to us, he was 28, going on 29. And his prime was a little bit behind him already. As I had seen him, he was a high flyer in his younger days, 21, 22, 23. But he still had enough juice left to do what he did. One of the most entertaining players you'd ever find. He had tremendous hands, his size of his hands. And he could do things with the ball that were over the top. I remember our last regular season game that first year when I was coaching them. We're playing in San Diego, at San Diego, and they had Elvin Hayes, and I'm thinking more of him than anyone else that played for them. We were down by 20 at the half. And the game meant something to us because for positioning purposes in the playoffs, it was worth some additional monies to the players. Now, bear in mind, the money back then wasn't anything like it is today. The payroll of the Bulls in 66 was $180,000 for 12 players. 12 players, total of 180. The Suns that first year was like $225,000. So the extra money, an extra 1,000 or 1,500 really meant something to players. At the half, I was young, I was dumb, and I was willing to do anything to get the job done. So I went off a little bit in the locker room. Anyway, we came back in the second half, kept coming back, chipping away. We got down to the last 24 seconds, and I called timeout, and I called a little play for Connie to come off a screen with his strong right hand, and he would have to take it to get past Alvin Hayes, who was a leaper. Hayes went up, blocked the shot. Hawk went down, grabbed the ball with his claw, like I said, his big hand, put it down, went up again to dunk, and he got blocked again, second time. The clock is now continuing to move. We're down now to the last 5 seconds. And one more time, he grabs the ball on the floor, and he starts to go up, but he brought it back and jammed it, and I jumped about 6 feet off the bench when that happened. So we're up by 1 with just a second or 2 to play, and I put a rookie in. A guy named Lamar Green, who's a leaper. Ironically, the first game I had coached was against the same team, coached by Alex Hannum, and it was a last-second kind of a situation, and they ran an out-of-bounds play that I remembered. Bear in mind, I didn't have assistant coaches. I was the GM, I was the coach, I was the assistant coach. Just by remembering what they did in a game 3 months earlier, I put in Lamar Green, and I said, you front Alvin Hayes, and when that ball is thrown in, you jump as high as you can, okay? Well, he did just that. He jumped so high, the ball hit him in his knees. That was the end of the game. Hawk had 44 and 20 rebounds, I think, in that game.
Great memories. I really appreciate you sharing those with us. I'd just like to quickly mention a pre-season game. October of 1971, 3,400 people watched the Suns beat the Bulls 115 to 110. It was at Bloom Township High School in Chicago Heights. Trivial to most, but I imagine for you it must have been a very memorable experience, given your links to Chicago, your ties to the Bulls, of course, and the fact that the game was played on the court that you graced as a high school player.
I've always tried to keep the ties and relationships from the old neighborhood, but that was important to me. I think in today's world, people just don't have a clue about things like that. I learned that as a young kid in the old Italian neighborhood. Don't forget where you came from. Don't forget your friends. Don't forget those who would help you accomplish things. I always attempted to give back. I remember in my first year with the Diamondbacks baseball team, after I gave birth to the Major League baseball team, we went back to Chicago, and most of my friends were all Cub fans. And I remember I bought a ton of tickets that Cubs were able to give me the seats back then. They had hundreds of people, all dressed in our colors, purple, a little bit of orange. We beat the Cubs. So I go to Chicago to play my old team that I was a big fan of. We beat them. You can never forget where you came from and the people who were there to help you in your journey.
You mentioned the 1976 NBA Finals a little while ago. That was a remarkable season for Phoenix in general. The team went 42-40, made the playoffs for just the second time in franchise history. You defeated Seattle and then upset the heavily favored Golden State Warriors and then advanced to meet the Celtics in the NBA Finals, of course. Though Boston ultimately would prevail and you took them to 6 games, this was the first of 4 times that you were named the NBA Executive of the Year in 1976. What memories do you have of that run to the NBA Finals and just the atmosphere in Phoenix around the team making it to the ultimate stage?
Well, we made a trade mid-season where we acquired the Herd from Buffalo. And that was a big, big addition to what we already had. Curtis Perry, a couple of big rookies, and Alvin Adams, who turned out to be Rookie of the Year, and Ricky Sobers. We very quietly were making our own run in the second half of that season. So we were building momentum, and we beat Seattle in that first series. Then we played the defending world champions, and we beat them in the seventh game at their place. And that was very, very exciting. I remember a play near the end of the game where Alvin Adams intercepted a guard-to-guard pass and went in for a flying dunk. He was a leaper. He really was. 6'9", 215, 18-pound center, playing against all the big giants in the NBA. Could rebound, could run, could block shots, had a nice shot, but that wasn't his strength necessarily. But he made the interception, went down for a flying dunk, and I knew that we were in the finals. And when we got back to Phoenix later, there were 10,000 people at the airport waiting for us, which, again, illustrates what a team can do in a community when they get all excited. Teams have a chance to bring communities together, and I've experienced that a number of times with the various teams I've had. Going to Boston was a thrill to participate in the finals. The old Boston Garden was an incredible place to play. They did everything they could to make life miserable for you. The locker room with the heat, with the cold water. It was really kind of funny when you get down to it. What wasn't funny was what happened in Game 5. We should have won that game. We really should have, with the triple overtime. Herd made a shot, put it into triple overtime, which is called a shot heard around the world. And that game has been looked upon as maybe the greatest game of all time in the history of the league. If it wasn't the first or the best, it had to be second. It had to be right there at the top. Richie Powers, a good official in the NBA, refused to make a call that would have cost Boston the game. Paul Silas called timeout when they didn't have any timeouts. And Richie just turned his head and avoided it. Rather than getting free throws and walking off the floor as a winner, we didn't get that. We lose the game in triple overtime and come back to Phoenix and we lose. That was a great experience, and my hope and anticipation was we were going to be back quite a bit in offense, and soon. It took 17 years for us to get back into the finals. That's how tough it is in the NBA.
What was your vantage point for that Game 5? How close to the court were you sitting? And did you actually see that non-call that Richie Powers made at the time?
Yes, I did. I was sitting basically at midcourt. Red Auerbach was sitting the section next to me, but it was only like 6 or 8 feet away, right at midcourt. So, yeah, I had a great vantage point, saw it all. All hell broke loose in the building. There was like a big fight that took place. It's like 100 degrees in the building. It was surreal is what it was.
Quite incredible when you look back on it. And also Richie Powers, incidentally, I think at the end of the second overtime, he was involved in a fight of sorts on the court with a fan before the game even resumed.
Right.
There was a great documentary that was put together by, I believe, Tom Leander called Cinderella Sons, which followed that 1976 Phoenix team. You mentioned scenes at the airport. I think it was called Sky Harbor.
Sky Harbor, correct.
There was some terrific footage that shows up in that documentary of just how obsessed the fan base was in Phoenix. The whole team, anybody associated with the team was just treated like rock stars. You're almost like the Beatles walking through that airport. What was it like at that time just to return back to Phoenix and to just see how invested the fans were in your franchise?
Well, it was exciting. Look, we were all young guys. It was an exciting time, but personally, I was so happy for the fans. It's an interesting dichotomy here when you look at the attitude of fans and how people jump on the bandwagon when the team is winning and how they jump off when they're losing. Well, it's because people could be pretty frustrated with their lot in life. If a team is winning, they want to identify with that winning product. Conversely, if they're losing or if they're a big loser, that's why people drop off and they're not following the team that much. Well, that's understandable. So we've had tremendous support in Phoenix for the Phoenix Suns. No question about it, through thick and thin. The good news is there haven't been many down years for the Suns in my 40 years with the Suns.
Now, due to time constraints, we simply can't cover all your incredible history with the Suns. The team made the postseason every year from 1978 through 1985. However, in the mid-1980s, the franchise did hit near rock bottom with a number of allegations that were made against some current and former players. Add to that as well, there was the tragic death of 1985 draft pick Nick Vanos. The Suns were in deep trouble. You managed to steer them back and going forwards, turn it into an incredible winner. Do you mind just quickly talking about dealing with that adversity in the mid-1980s and how you steered the ship and corrected the course there, Jerry?
At the age I am and the involvement I have with Grand Canyon University, I give advice to a lot of young people. And that story, among others, is one that I use as an example. And that is, life is full of adversity. Not that it may come. You will have adversity in life. How you deal with the adversity is the key. So I had an option to buy the team, something I had negotiated even when I was 28, 29, and it would take some adversity where ownership was ready to part company with the team. That all happened because of that investigation, which really went nowhere, by the way, in terms of players being indicted or anything like that or convicted of anything. But the ownership had decided they were ready to move on. I had 6 weeks to put a deal together. I was able to do it. I paid $44 million for the franchise. The highest price ever paid for a team at that time was $32.5. The media afterwards said to me, Jerry, why would you do that? You paid so much money for this team. Why would you pay that much? And I said, well, I believe in this city. I believe in this market. That's number one. Number two, I believe in the NBA, in the future of the NBA. And number three, I believe in myself. And to have this opportunity to do this, I know it's going to work out. Well, that was 1987. In 2004, when I sold the team, it was for over $400 million, and it was the highest price ever paid. And it stayed that way for 7 years until the Warriors sold for about $60 million more than that. So we got above market by far. I don't look back on that and say, gee, if you had kept the team for another 20 years, look where you would have had the value at. I don't look at that. That's not important to me. You make decisions and you move on.
Really pleased to hear that. But yeah, incredible turnaround. And you stuck with it, turned the franchise around. And there was a number of moves that you made in 1987 and beyond that really helped the franchise get to the point where they did at the 1993 NBA Finals, which we'll get to shortly. In February of 1988, you made another difficult decision when you traded away fan favourite Larry Nance to the Cleveland Cavaliers. In return, the Suns received a rookie Kevin Johnson. You got guys like Mark West, Tyrone Corbin, and a 1988 draft pick, which became Dan Marley. Do you mind just talking through that massive deal and the impact that it had on the franchise in the years to come?
Well, we decided that the best way to turn things around was to take your best asset and see what you could get for your best asset. And Larry was that. Larry was, I thought, a terrific player. He had size, 6'10 and a half, could run, jump, block some shots, became a scorer. But he was our best player, and he had a great future. You mentioned all the people we got for him in a draft pick. Well, that's why we did it, because we felt we could end up with something. But I wasn't finished. There was a player, when free agency was announced, a new piece of free agency, which was unrestricted free agency. I remember being told that at an NBA owners meeting, and I kind of looked at Seattle's owner at the time, and I was thinking Tom Chambers when we were told what the new explanation was for unrestricted free agency. And in my mind, I said, you just lost Tom Chambers. In my mind, I didn't say that to him. On the evening at midnight when you could reach out, otherwise before that it's tampering, I was on the phone. And hours later, I was in Los Angeles. And a couple hours later, I had Tom Chambers. He was there with his agent. We struck first. I asked his agent, what do you want? He gave me the number. I said, no, here's what I'm willing to do. You've got 10 minutes to give me an answer. And he responded within the 10 minutes and said, you got yourself a forward. Now, another turnaround, the biggest turnaround ever, from 28 wins to 55 wins in the conference finals, because Chambers, Kevin Johnson, West, Corbin, the other players that we had, Marley became a great fan favorite. And that was a great run with that group of players until we acquired Charles Barkley.
In June of 1992, you helped engineer that deal that brought Barkley from the 76ers to Phoenix. Where does that rank on your list of achievements?
I don't rank things. I think it was a very big move. I think that it worked out extremely well. I hated to lose Jeff Hornacek, by the way. He was a second-round pick in that draft, and he was the last player picked on the second round. Everyone in the NBA passed on Jeff twice, therefore. He came in, we changed his shot, he became a terrific shooter and an excellent player. Every time you make a deal, don't ever think you're going to steal it. It usually costs you something that you really want and you want to keep. And I didn't want to lose him. I didn't, but was willing to at the end because we thought Barkley could get us over the hump and winning a championship. We were playing in the conference finals. We were doing well, so on and so forth. But Barkley, we thought, would be that missing piece. We didn't get there. We had a great year that next year. We lost to Chicago in the finals. The next 2 years, I thought we could have won, should have won. Houston knocked us out 2 years in a row. They win the championships. We didn't. And that was, to me, our best run, where we could have maybe won 2 or 3 in a row with the group that we had.
Very close. You got to the precipice there and didn't quite get the win. You had the home court for the 1993 finals. So the games 1 and 2 were in Phoenix. Unfortunately, you dropped both, but then you went back to Chicago and won 2 out of 3 in Chicago before that game 6 back in Phoenix. What was it like to return to Chicago 25 years or so on from when you left being an early employee of the team and just watching the finals unfold?
Well, first of all, born and raised there, never felt 100% that I ever left. These people in Chicago always made me feel that I was their guy, that I was coming home whenever I was there. So it was exciting to be playing Chicago for the championship. And there were 2 teams that I gave birth to on the court at the same time. It was very thrilling. I'm sorry we couldn't get the win in terms of the championship, but it wasn't meant to be.
Charles Barkley paid tribute to you at the 1993 All-Star Game in Utah by wearing the number 23. I wasn't aware of the links to it until I started researching again for this chat today. When did you become aware that he was planning to do that? And can you explain to our listener the importance of number 23 dating back to your playing days?
It's just the number that I love, and I always had it as long as I was playing basketball. It was a shocker when Charles decided to do that, so he caught me totally by surprise. If you get to know Charles over the years, he's always doing things that surprise you, okay? So you can't be prepared. No way you can.
I'd like to quickly talk about Paul Westphal. He was named the head coach of the Suns for that 1993 season. His links, of course, to Phoenix go back decades to the mid-1970s. He played for the team for 6 seasons. Do you mind talking about the impact that he had on the team, particularly in that 1993 season, that iconic press conference he had when you were down to the LA Lakers in the playoffs? And sadly, Paul passed away earlier this year. What sort of impact did he have on that team and you personally, Jerry?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to the trade where we traded Charlie Scott for Paul Westphal. Paul came to Phoenix, and for the next 4 or 5 years, he was as dominant a player at the guard position as there was in the NBA. He was first team All-NBA, I think 3 times, and also second team once. There weren't many better guards than Paul Westphal during that run. That's just something I'll never forget. He was as good as they were at that time. I did hire him. The coach became an assistant coach before he became the head coach. His first year was that first year with Barkley. We led the NBA, as I said earlier, with the best record the entire season. And we played the Lakers, 1 seed versus an 8 seed, and they beat us twice. So we're down 0-2, going to LA for the next 2 games. So Paul at the press conference said, we're going to go to LA and we're going to win. We're going to come back. We're going to win here. And then we're going to move on to the next round. He predicted that we were going to come back and win. And he stood by it. He never backed off. We almost lost in game 3. I remember that ending of game 3 in LA, went right down to the wire. Out of adversity, there's always opportunity. Back to what I said to you earlier. It's still hard to believe we lost 2 games in Chicago in the championship series at home. You play all year to get the home court advantage. Again, it wasn't meant to be.
In the finals, 5 of the 6 games were won by the road team. So it was a really strange series in respect to that as well. Just around that time of 1993, you also underwent a complete rebrand of the Suns logo, design, new uniforms, fantastic uniforms, which are iconic to this day. A former guest on my show, Tom O'Grady, worked with you to help come up with the designs. Do you remember the rebrand process? And you also moved into America West Arena as well, one of the state-of-the-art arenas at the time.
It was a state-of-the-art arena at the time, and we were very proud of what we were able to create. Architects did a great job. We wanted to build the most intimate arena ever designed, and that was referring to proximity to the floor, to the court, to the players, and we got it in spades. Our success that year on the court and off the court was astounding. We were in the 15th marketplace in the country, citywide, size, and eyeball-wise for television, and yet we led the NBA in revenues, which was an amazing accomplishment. But it happened that one time, and then others caught up real quick to see how we did it. And larger markets had the advantage, etc. And it reminds me of an old story from the old neighborhood. It was an immigrant by the name of Mike Kalachi, uneducated but wise. He took young guys under his wing, including me. And one night, in front of the 3-star liquor store, because I grew up 2 doors away from that place in the bocce ball court, next to it. And Mike, in broken English, was looking up at the stars. And he said, Jerry, do you see that star? He was pointing to a particular star. And I figured out which one. And I said, yeah, I see it, Mike. He says, remember, it's better to get on that star for one day than never get there at all. How profound is that? I never forgot that. So again, advice to the young people, reach for the stars. Reach for it. When people say you can't, show them how you can and will. Reach for the star. It's better to be there one day than never get there.
That's a great anecdote. I love that. You were inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2004. You were presented by 4 Hall of Famers. You had Bobby Knight, Pete Newell, Wayne Embry, and the aforementioned Connie Hawkins. In that speech, you mentioned that you coached 2 Hall of Famers, coached against 35 Hall of Famers, and you played against 13 players and coaches who are in the Hall of Fame. How fondly do you look back on that induction in 2004 and just overall your life in amongst basketball, Jerry?
Well, let me start off with this. When I was 7, someone handed me a ball and I smelled the leather smell. And that was the beginning of a love affair that's lasted my entire lifetime. Still not over, but that's how much basketball impacted me. And it's made an incredible life for me and my family. So the people I selected, you need to have a Hall of Famer present you, or as many as you wish. Wayne Embry was a contemporary of mine. I wanted him. Connie Hawkins was the player that we described before. Pete Newell probably had as much impact on me basketball-wise, wisdom. He was a coach of an Olympic team. He was a coach of a team that won the NCAAs. He had great impact on my thoughts about the game and how it should be played. I'll always remember Pete for his wisdom. Bobby Knight was a contemporary. We played against each other. He was at Ohio State when I was at Illinois. Competitors and contemporaries as we kind of moved on after our college careers. He was coaching. It took me a little while to get into the NBA, but we were very close. Each of the people that I had an influence on my life, and I wanted them to be part of it. For all of us, you hear stories about the speeches that are made at the Hall of Fames. You don't forget where you started. You don't forget where you came from. Thank the people who helped you get to where you got. Not that anyone is looking to go to the Hall of Fame. You don't think about anything like that. You do the best job you can as a player, as a coach, as a contributor. There are many ways to contribute to the game and its success. And I love the Hall of Fame. I'm still chairman of the Hall of Fame. And I'm very proud of what we've done with the remodeling and new technology. It's gangbusters. It's a beautiful place. And I encourage people to go to Springfield, Massachusetts, if they ever get the opportunity and see it.
In 2005, you were named the managing director of USA Basketball. Though we don't have the time now to cover your immense contributions to Team USA, I will link to a great podcast episode where you talked about that incredible rebuild that you were responsible for and bringing the USA back to gold medal wins. Is there anything, though, you would like to touch on from that period with USA Basketball before we wrap things up, Jerry?
Well, you could do a lot of things representing your city, your state, but when you're representing the country on the international stage, that's a whole different level. I took it very seriously. The fact that we were able to win 4 gold medals in 08, 12, 16, and 20, actually 21 because of COVID. That was an incredible run. I was asked to do it. I loved every second of it. We won some world championships along the way also, and I'm very proud of all the players who made it possible.
Is there a favorite moment at all from those times that you've mentioned with USA Basketball? Can you narrow it down to one?
Well, every one of those Olympics were different. The first one in 08, we were the redeemed team after how badly they had performed in 04 in Athens, Greece. The moment where the medals were being awarded, the flag was being raised, the Star-Spangled Banner was being played for all of us. Here's what threw my mind. Very few people have an opportunity to have a dream, watch it fulfilled, and get to the desired result. All of that happened, all in that moment, and it was a great moment.
Incredible memories there. I will link to that podcast episode where you go into great depth about how it all came to be. It was a fascinating listen. Just on the back of that previous question, Basketball Digest had a regular feature which was called The Game I'll Never Forget. Now, is there a game from your career, either as a player, a coach, an executive, that stands out more than any other?
Well, it has to be Game 5 in Boston, the triple overtime game. How could I pick any other game when it's considered maybe the greatest game of all time?
Now, Jerry, thank you so much for making yourself available today. And I want to quickly thank a great friend of the show, Fat Lever, who helped me connect with you, and also another associate of yours, Jennifer Gray, who helped us connect today as well. Thanks for your time, and I wish you continued success and good health.
You're welcome. Same to you, Adam. All righty, you take care.
Thanks for listening. I welcome your interaction with the show. Tap the microphone icon on my website to send me a voicemail. You can suggest discussion topics or guests you'd like to hear conversations with. Time now to share another great review from a fan of the show. Thanks to Michael Olivares, I hope I pronounced that correctly, via Apple Podcasts in the USA. It's titled Outstanding Storytelling and is rated 5 stars. It reads, "This podcast is a must-listen for basketball junkies like me. I can't get enough of the behind-the-scenes stories from NBA insiders. Each new episode is eagerly anticipated. Great job as usual, Adam. Cheers." Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate the support, and thanks for leaving that review. Worldwide, the show has 185 ratings on Apple Podcasts with an average of 4.9 stars with 100 reviews across all providers. I'll read out the 100th review on the next episode. Thanks for your continued support. If you add a review, I'd love to read it out on a future episode. Your ratings and reviews are one of the best ways to support the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please tell your basketball-loving friends about it. As I always say, your word-of-mouth recommendations are truly worth their weight in gold. Stay up to date with my podcast and subscribe to my free NBA history newsletter. You'll receive exclusive details on upcoming episodes, future guests to appear on the show, and more. Sign up via my website or simply email me, inallairness@gmail.com. You can follow my show in various ways. Search In All Airness, 3 words, on your listening app of choice. The show is available on most platforms. Check the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with a great range of guests. My Instagram and Twitter handle is @InAllAirness. Search In All Airness on YouTube and Facebook too. Join me next time for another edition of the show.